Hello and welcome back to Second Cup with Keith. I'm your host, Keith Giles. And in this episode, I want to talk a little bit about the power of empathy and how it could be the key to unlock and solve many of our, if not most, of the problems that we are facing today as individuals, as well as a culture and as a society. But before we jump into that, I'm going to do a quick little plug here. We have a sponsor, which is the Wild Goose Festival. I was there a couple of years ago, right before COVID, and it was a lot of fun. It's a really cool festival. This year, it is happening. It's still in North Carolina. Sorry, North Carolina. Let me see here. It's July 11th to the 14th. In Union Grove, North Carolina. If you go to wildgoosefestival.org and you go to purchase a ticket and you use the promo code A-HELL, A-HELL, you will get $50 off a weekend adult weekend pass. So there you go. Go do that. Wildgoosefestival.org. Use the promo code A-HELL, get $50 off. And who knows, I might even get to see you there in July. Even if I don't, it's a great festival. They have amazing speakers. You will love it. I'm curious. Let's see if I can tell you some of the people that are going to be there. Well, Brian McLaren, Sarah Heath, David Gushy, Doug Paget, Flamey Grant, Jim Wallace. Yeah, some amazing people. So it's a lot of fun, and you'll meet a lot of great people there too. So go check that out. Wildgoosefestival.org, promo code A-HELL, save $50. All right, so let's jump into this episode. So in the previous episode of Second Cup with Keith, I did something I haven't done on this podcast really, which was to talk a little bit about politics and raise some concerns about this Project 2025. And I want to just say up front here, this is not the direction the podcast is going. I will not continue to do podcasts that provide commentary or reflection on specific things that are going on in American politics. So if you're concerned about that, rest easy. That's not where I'm going. But what I do want to talk about, something that came up, it's kind of connected. It's related to this idea of sort of this us and them, conservative versus liberal, or progressives versus conservatives, or Republicans versus Democrats. That us and them thing, which I have talked about a lot here on this podcast, especially in the last year or so, and about how important it is for us to break out of that us and them mentality, right? So I just saw something that kind of sparked this conversation that I want to have on the podcast today, was something that I was watching on YouTube. I saw this clip. It's a short clip. It's called After the Cut. It's from The Daily Show. And Jordan Klepper, so he's just kind of talking to the audience, sort of after they've recorded the episode or something like that. I think that's what After the Cut means. And he's taking questions from the audience. And someone in the audience asked him if there was, what's the best way to sort of change someone's mind? And what they're talking about is, if you're talking to somebody who's really into the MAGA kind of Trump mentality, how can you change their mind? And his response was so good. I'll try to post a link to it in the notes so you can watch the whole thing. It's real short. It's like 3 minutes long. And I'm just going to paraphrase it. But what he says is that we're suffering from a crisis of certainty. And on both sides, that people on both sides, Democrats and Republicans, or MAGA and progressives, or whatever, however you want to think of that, the divide, we're all suffering from a crisis of certainty. And that's what he said. He said that, if you come to a conversation with somebody that thinks differently than you, and your goal is, I'm going to change this person's mind, you cannot do that if you come at it, if you approach it from the perspective of, I am absolutely certain about my position. Because if that's the energy that you come to the person with in the conversation, they're going to match that. In other words, they're going to sense that you are certain of your rightness and correctness. And then they're going to meet you with an equal amount of energy of the same amount of certainty that no, they're right and you're wrong. And you'll get nowhere. And you probably experienced that, I'm sure. I've experienced that as well many times. And so his advice is that if you want to have those kinds of conversations, and he says, we're talking about conversations with actual people that you know, family members and friends, that there's some level of connection and love there, outside of the political conversation. And by the way, I think we can apply this to anything, not just the political conversation. And I'd like to do that. I'd like to say, let's just think about what he said, the advice he's giving us to approach whether. So a lot of us, many of us have family members. Yes, we may agree with them on politics, but we also disagree with them on theology. And so how do we approach these conversations with family members and friends, close friends, people that know us and love us on some level, right? There's some connection there. And yet we disagree on these things that polarize us and keep us in these us-them mentalities, right? So what Jordan suggests is that you come to the conversation with your own uncertainties, expressing and confessing your own vulnerabilities about your beliefs. That when you come to the conversation saying and about something, find something that you can honestly, say, hey, I'm unsure about this thing that I believe. That's really the first step, and that's really probably your best and only hope of that conversation going in the direction that they might also concede that there are some things that they are also not sure about in their views, because no one will ever change their view as long as they are convinced that they are certain, right? As long as they're convinced that they could not possibly be wrong. So if you want to get to the place in the conversation where the other person is at least willing to admit that they deep down inside are not completely 100% sure about something, you're dead in the water, right? You're never going to make any headway with convincing that person. And I think he has great advice. If you want to have that other person admit to you, confess to you that they have doubts, that they are uncertain about something, right? What they're doing is letting their guard down, and they're being really honest with you and real with you and saying, yeah, I don't know sometimes if I really believe eternal conscious torment is true. Like, wow, what an amazing thing that would be if you could get to that point with somebody, right? A family member who maybe wants to convince you that your deconstruction is taking you down a bad path, and they're concerned for your, eternal salvation or whatever. If you could reach a point in the conversation where they would admit to you that, well, I'm just not sure about this one thing, or I have my own doubts about whether or not this scripture is saying what I think it's saying, or something like that, right? But the only way you're going to get to that point in the conversation is if you go first. And if you admit to them, yeah, sometimes I'm not 100% sure if I believe X, Y, or Z, right? Something that you hold dear, something that you believe in. And here's the thing, though. Let's just be really honest and transparent. That still might not work. Like, what you want when you come to the conversation and you are vulnerable and you're confessing your uncertainty about something you believe, you're doing it in the hopes that they are going to reciprocate, that they're also going to say, yeah, well, I'll just say I'm not sure I believe, or I'm certain about this or that. And so maybe you could prime the conversation that way. You could say, hey, before we get into this conversation, can we both just take a second here? Can we both just admit, let's just think about this. Let's think about the things that we believe. And we're not saying we don't believe them, but could we both confess or admit, just be vulnerable with each other and say, here's something about my belief that I'm not 100% certain about. And I'll go first. And for me, I'm not 100% certain, I don't know, whatever. It'd be different for everybody, right? You'd have to think of something to concede. And then you would wait for them, right? So, okay, I've done this first. I've admitted something I'm not 100% sure about. What about you? And then they would admit, okay, well, I'm not 100% sure about this thing. Okay, and then neither one of you now can pounce on the other and start diving into 20 reasons why they're wrong. I think what needs to happen right after that mutual admission and confession of vulnerability, of uncertainty, is to both sit in that for a little bit with each other and say, yeah, it's hard to not be certain, right? It's uncomfortable. Yeah. Talk about uncertainty for a bit. And then maybe I would suggest, in the context of maybe deconstruction, talk about how, and this is where I would go with it. To me, this is a great opportunity to talk about sort of the mystery of God, right? To say, yeah, God is a being beyond all comprehension. Isn't God just higher and wider and longer and deeper? We're all doing our best, but maybe certainty isn't really even possible 100%. Maybe you could have a certain degree of confidence in something, but you're never going to be 100% sure. At some point, faith does kick in. But, just confessing, I'm not 100% sure about this, because we're talking about God. And so some things we take on faith, right? And so I've had lots of conversations with people who are deconstructing their faith who would affirm, something that really important to them, let's say like that God is love. And they could even quote some verses, right? 1 John, right? God is love, and all who live in love live in God, and God lives in them, 1 John 4:16. Or other things, for God so loved the world, John 3:16, or 1 Corinthians 13, where Paul talks about, how love keeps no record of wrongs, and love is patient, love is kind. And so, we could affirm and assert that we are fairly confident that God is love. But can we say with 100% certainty that we're sure that God is love? We hope so. I think we would all admit that if God isn't love and we're wrong about that we're probably screwed. Because again, if you're thinking about this being of absolute power and authority, that created the universe, that fills everything, that has absolute power and authority, then if that being isn't love, if that being is wrath, if that being is vindictive, if that being is jealous, if that being is, a jerk or dangerous or scary, well, what can you do about it? Right? You're just a pawn. You're at the whim and the mercy of that being. And so, yeah, I would do that. I would affirm that I believe God is love, but I'm saying I believe God is love. I'm not saying I know for a fact that God is love. So, anyway, overall, I just wanted to kick everything off with what I thought was great advice that Jordan gave in that clip, about really your best hope is finding common ground with the other person. I've talked about this a lot, especially when Wendy and I were part of Peace Catalyst International, and we were working, to build relationships and friendships with people, outside of our faith system. So specifically with Muslims. And I've spoken at several events with Muslims and Christians, both in person and online. And again, I've written about this. I've talked about this, about really, when it comes to peacemaking with somebody else who you don't agree on some major things, and faith is a big one, right? But politics is also a really big one. And I think this applies for really anything. It's very important to take the time to find some common ground. I think that's what Jordan's talking about. Finding some common ground to begin the conversation. And that is really the beginning of the path to peace. And what I mean by that is, the way I've always expressed it is there's two paths you can take. Anytime you're engaging in a conversation or a dialogue with somebody who thinks differently than you have two choices. Ultimately, you have two choices. You can concentrate and focus your attention and your conversation, sort of the filter that you're going to use throughout the conversation. And you're going to either use the filter of agreement and common ground, or you're going to use the filter of disagreement and differences. Now, most of the time, sadly, we enter into those conversations focused on primarily our differences. And when you do that, if you decide that's how you're going to approach the conversation, again, let's say Muslim and Christian, well, then, the Christian's going to say, well, these are all the ways that you and I disagree. I believe that Jesus is the incarnate Son of God, and you don't believe that God has a son. And I believe in the Trinity, and you don't believe in the Trinity. And I believe that Jesus was crucified on the cross, and you as a Muslim, you don't believe that Jesus died on the cross because God wouldn't do that to his prophet, and on and on and on. And then so you're just going to make a long list of things you disagree on, and your conversation will be about arguing over who's right about it and who's wrong about it. And so that path, which again is typically the one that we decide to take, sadly, but whether that's politics or religion or whatever it happens to be, if you begin the conversation, you're following a path that is focused on all of the things we disagree on, then that path will lead to conflict. It will lead to an argument. It will lead, because it's focused on disagreement. And so it leads to debate. It leads to arguments. And we know historically it can lead to violence, and it can lead to death, right? It can lead to genocide, or just religious violence or political violence, because that's where that path leads. We know that if you start walking that path, that's where it will end up. If you keep walking it and you don't get off that path, that's where it's leading. It's going to lead to conflict, arguments, debate, disagreement, and violence. So there's the other path, and that's what I'm talking about here. The other path is to say, and again, let's start with Muslims, just as an example. If a Christian and a Muslim are having a conversation, you could decide to have a conversation based on all of the things you agree on. In other words, finding the common ground. And when you do that, you find that Muslims and Christians agree on a whole lot, right? Muslims and Christians agree that Jesus was a prophet of God, that he was the Messiah, that he was the Christ. We agree on that. Muslims and Christians agree that, because again, in the Quran, it says that Jesus creates life. Jesus is coming back again to judge the world. There's a long list of things that Christians and Muslims agree on. So, if you begin your conversation looking for common ground, discussing the things that you agree on, you find you have more that you agree on than you disagree on. And that path leads to a conversation, a dialogue. It leads to understanding. It leads to connection. It leads to friendship. And ultimately, that path leads to peace. And I would just suggest that that's a better path to take when it comes to having these kind of conversations with people we disagree with. Now, not that it's easy, right? It might be, on the political side of things, so much more difficult to find anything you agree on. But I think if you're willing to look, you could find something. You could find 5 things, at least. 3 things, bare minimum, right? You love America. You want what's best for your family and your children. You believe that America has an obligation, to serve the benefit of its citizens. You could find it if you started the conversation with someone like that and you said, what are the things we agree on? Can we agree on this? Can we agree on that? And you literally just wrote them down. You could probably come up with 3, 4, 5, maybe even 10 things that you agree on. So start there. Start with the things you agree on. Focus on what you have in common. And I have found this to be such a critical thing, so going back to some previous episodes that I've done where I've talked about this sort of metaphysical reality of recognizing that separation is an illusion and recognizing that on the quantum level, right, on this quantum science level, it appears to us that I'm over here and you're over there. You're you and I'm me, and we are not the same, right? And there's also distinction between this is the way we see and understand the world around us, reality itself, right? This coffee cup is not this microphone, and this microphone is not, it's not these pair of headphones, it's not my glasses, it's not these posters on the wall behind me. These are all separate things. They're made of different, materials. They serve different functions, and they are all radically different things. They're separate things. And so we see and understand and perceive the world as, there are separate beings, separate objects, separate things. And so that's how we understand things, as separation. But on the quantum level, what quantum science has shown us is that even though that is the way we perceive reality, it is not the correct way of understanding reality. That even though we perceive these separate objects and separate beings, on the quantum level, all there is the quantum field. The only thing that's real, the only thing that exists, all of reality, all matter in the universe, all space in the universe is expressed through the quantum field. Or I should say it this way, everything is an expression of the quantum field. And so the quantum field manifests in this coffee cup. The quantum field manifests in this microphone. The quantum field manifests in my headphones. The quantum field manifests in me. I am a manifestation of the quantum field, and you are a manifestation of the quantum field. And every building, every tree, every vehicle, everything you could possibly see or experience in the entire universe is merely an expression of the one single, unbroken quantum field. And that's reality. So when you think about that, and you think about okay, so on the scientific quantum level, everything is one thing. It's just a different expression of the one thing. Well, then that maps over to things we see in Scripture, and things that Jesus says, things that Paul says, things that Rumi says, things that Black Elk says, things that are said in the Hindu Vedas and the Bhagavad Gita and the in Buddhism and Native American mythology and mysticism and things like that. It's repeated over and over and over again from a mystical side, religious, theological side, however you want to think of that, it's mirrored in the quantum science side of things. This idea that everything is one thing. And so, Paul says that Christ is all, and that we are filled with the fullness of the one who fills everything in every way. So that's the way Paul expresses it. Quantum science expresses it the way I just said, right? There's just the quantum field. Everything is the quantum field. Everything is merely an expression of the one quantum field. And again, other mystics, other, gurus and different figures have expressed those ideas in different ways. And so we're seeing a convergence now. We're living at a time in history where there is a convergence of these ideas, of these concepts, that there is no separation between you and me. There's a perceived separation. We perceive separation. Physical bodies, we look different, we sound different, we talk different, we have individually different ideas and thoughts and experiences of our own. But on the quantum level, you are an expression of the quantum field, the same quantum field that I am an expression of. We are part of the same quantum field. And that quantum field is what connects us to one another and to everyone else around us. And the quantum field itself, which again, many quantum scientists have expressed. Again, these are quantum scientists, quantum physicists, who have expressed this idea of the quantum field as a consciousness, as a singular consciousness. And so if you think of a great singular consciousness, that's another way of saying the Great Spirit, or the Source, or maybe even God, or Christ. So that's revolutionary. That's fantastic. That's amazing. So you can have that realization. That can click for you. You can say, oh, I get that. You can say, I accept that. I believe that. That's beautiful. That's powerful. And I agree. I think it is. But the challenge for all of us is, how do I live that out in my daily life? Because in my daily experience, even if I can stop 2 or 3 times a day and close my eyes and meditate and say, I am an expression of the quantum field. I am connected to everyone and everything around me. Everything around me and everyone around me is an expression of the one great quantum consciousness. Wow. We are all an expression of Christ. We are all an expression of the source of the quantum field, or however you want to think of that, right? And we probably need to do that probably 10 times a day to stop and remind ourselves. And we need that reminder because what we're experiencing as we go throughout our regular day-to-day experience is separation. I'm here, you're there, I'm going to call you, you're going to meet me there, you're going to do this. Like, what we experience is separation. And so there is it's a constant struggle to live out of the reality of oneness and connection. It's hard, right? It's just hard to do. Now, especially when we are encountering people who have radically different ideas about things. Ideas that we feel threaten us on some level, right? And I think that's exactly what we see, whether it's religious deconstruction, and I'll just say in my situation, my religious deconstruction is a threat to my people and family members and friends of mine who haven't deconstructed. They see me as the threat to them. I threaten their beliefs, their certainty, because I'm saying that isn't true and that isn't certain, and I'm questioning it. So now, from their perspective, I'm the danger. I'm the scary one, right? I'm the one who's creating the chaos. On the political side, if I have family and friends who are they're MAGA, Republicans, and they think Trump is the greatest thing in the world, and they want to put Trump back in the White House again and everything else, well, then they're the threat to me. I'm perceiving them as a threat. They're a threat to me and what I think is the world I want to live in. Like, I don't want to live in a world that's all about like the Project 2025 stuff, this Christian theocracy. That's terrifying to me. And the more they talk that way and act that way, the more I see Christian nationalism growing and getting stronger and becoming more of a threat, a real threat, that threatens me. And now I'm holding them at arm's length, and I'm saying, you're dangerous and you're scary, and I want you to stop and I want you to go away, which is what they're saying to me on the religious side of things, right? But this is good. It's good to understand that and recognize that, right? Okay, that's our reality. That's our lived reality for many of us at this very moment in time. We are experiencing sort of weaponized us and them mentality, a weaponized separation. The way you think, the way you talk scares me, threatens me. And when you're at that level, it's difficult to do anything other than focus on all the things we disagree on. Because what's more important than correcting that wrong way of thinking, especially if I see that wrong way of thinking as a threat to me and a threat to my way of life? So finding common ground is probably in those situations, in those conversations, in those relationships, is probably the most difficult and possibly, we might even say, impossible things to do in that moment. You know, if you're over there talking about wanting to get rid of public education, and you want to install these Christ-appointed magistrates to oversee every decision that's ever made, about schools, about church, about laws, about human rights, and this person is going to apply some sort of biblical principles, and not the Constitution, not the laws that are on the books, but just what this person, how this person perceives the Bible says blank, and then that's how we're going to, rule on this issue, on this question. That terrifies me, right? The more you keep thinking that way and talking that way, they're like, man, no. That's in that conversation when I'm faced with that, or I'm hearing that coming out of the mouth of somebody else. That is, I can't imagine in that moment saying, what do we have in common? What's our common ground here? Man, that would be so hard to do. So first of all, counterintuitive, because my natural reaction in that moment is not to stop and say, what do I have in common with this person? My natural reaction is to say, what is wrong with this wacko? And how did they get so screwed up? Right? And all I want to do is focus on how wrong they are, how I'm right about this and they're wrong about this. And again, that's the natural thing, but it's not going to lead us to anything other than continued division, separation, and conflict. Our only hope is this level of vulnerability, uncertainty, and empathy and connection. We have to be able to find some level of empathy and connection with this other human being. And again, understand, I'm talking about person-to-person connection and relationship. Then this is also really difficult, I think, sometimes for us to break out of. So quite often when we're hearing these ideas coming out of the mouth of another person, we are not able to separate those ideas from that other person. In other words, we can't see the humanity of that other person in that moment. All we can see are those ideas being articulated by that person. The ideas coming out of their mouth, the ideas that are taking residence in their brain, and our opposition to those ideas is very real and very strong, very visceral. We hate those ideas. We are terrified of those ideas. And so it causes us to want to act as if we hate that person because we hate the ideas coming out of their mouth or out of their brain. And so it's very important for us to humanize that other person, to look for it, to fight for it, to struggle for it, to stop and take a deep breath and count to 10 and look this person again, the person, the other person. This could be your best friend, your mom, your dad, your brother, your sister, like a literal brother or sister. Someone that you have a relationship with and you want to continue to have a relationship and a connection with. But you're finding it difficult to do that because of these ideas that seem so threatening to you. By the way, I'm not talking about this like this is easy for me. Okay. I'm talking about something that, again, I feel like it sounds almost impossible, but at the same time, I really believe it's our best and only hope. Because I've said this so many times, when we talk about the reality of non-duality, when we talk about the reality of that separation is an illusion, when we talk about this reality that we are all connected, we are all in Christ, we are all one with Christ and with one another. That idea, the more we can hold on to that idea and live out of that idea leads us to the abolition of war, the abolition of prejudice, of racial hatred, of us and them thinking, right? But only to the degree that we are able to maintain the focus on our oneness and on our connection. And that is about looking for and finding and standing on whatever common ground we can discover with this other person. And it may be as simple as you're a human being and I'm a human being. You love your spouse and I love my spouse. You love your children and I love my children. You struggle with finances and I struggle with finances. You struggle with depression, I struggle with depression. You struggle with, anxiety and I struggle with anxiety. Like, it may just be like, let's just take the issues away, take the theology away, take the politics away. Let's just start there. We are human beings. We care about people. And maybe the first step would be to look at that other person across the table or across the Zoom call or however, whatever the situation is, and say, I care about you. I care about this relationship. I care about you and I continuing to be friends, continuing to have a dialogue where we value one another and we listen to one another, and we don't have to agree, but both of us are willing to work for and fight for unity beyond agreement. Now, I've talked about this a long time. I experienced it initially when Wendy and I were doing our house church way back when. We did that for 11 years. And we were able to create a space and invite people in from different theological backgrounds who did not all agree on theology and yet experienced love and connection and welcome and oneness with one another in spite of our differences in theology. And the way we accomplished that was, well, we found the one thing we all agreed on, which was Jesus. And we didn't even all necessarily agree the same things about Jesus. Some of us were Trinitarian. Some of us were oneness Pentecostals. They don't believe in the Trinity. Some of us thought that Jesus was just a great teacher, but weren't sure that Jesus was divine in any sense of the word. But maybe not. I don't know. And that didn't matter. What we agreed on was Jesus, and so we started with Jesus. And we allowed people to, color outside the lines there without rejecting them, without arguing with them, without trying to prove to them that they're wrong and we're right. And again, so I know it can be done. I know it's possible. I know it is very possible because I did it for 11 years. It's possible to genuinely love the other person, care about the other person, weep with them when they have loss, weep with them when they are going through a hard time, stand with them in solidarity when they're struggling, be concerned about them, take them a meal, encourage them, have a real human connection with them, knowing that you don't agree with that person 100% on your theology. And so I know it can be done. But again, both people in that relationship have to play by certain rules. Both of them have to be willing to say, I am willing to love you and have this relationship with you, knowing that we don't agree, and I'm committed to being connected to you, even if we never agree. I'm even just not even going to bother to argue with you about trying to change your mind about something. I'm just going to have a connection with you. Now, here I want to say, though, when those are your ground rules, when your ground rules are, I'm going to lay down my defenses because I know you're not coming at me. I know you're not arguing. You're not trying to convince me that you're right and I'm wrong. So I lay down my guard, but that's a level of trust. I'm trusting that if I lay down my guard, you're not going to use that against me, and vice versa. I'm not going to do that to you either. But here's the beautiful thing that happens, and I experienced this many, many times. I would say one of the most powerful things that happened during those 11 years when we were in a community of people, 20, 30 people, who did not all agree on theology, but met together on common ground with a common focus on Jesus, and then developed relationships based on common mutual love and respect for one another as human beings. We could listen to people. I could listen to someone, sitting in my living room or someone's living room, sitting on the couch, sitting on the floor, that person who could share something that I didn't agree with, but they could share it in a way that wasn't about, making a point or proving a point. They're just being vulnerable. They're just being real and honest. I see it this way. And I could listen to them. And quite often they would share something that they would say, well, I see it this way. But again, not from the perspective of arguing or debating, just simply from an honest place of this is what I see, this is what I think, this is what I believe. And I could hear it. And many times it didn't change my mind. But you know what? A lot of times it did. And so we were able to, I would say, have influence on one another, but not from a place of intentionally scheming how I'm gonna change your mind. In other words, I think we were influenced. We became changed. We changed and influenced one another, but probably not in the ways we intended. Does that make sense? Our guards were down. We were allowed to use our imaginations. We were allowed to consider things, to hold things loosely. I always say this, don't let the cement dry. And, sometimes I would say, I never thought of it that way. That's interesting. And sometimes I would say, I never thought of it that way. That's interesting, but I don't believe it. I don't accept it, and I could put it aside. But sometimes I would say, well, that's interesting. I've never thought of it that way. What if that's true? And again, it was trusting one another to think for themselves and being open to new ideas without being threatened by those ideas. And again, it's all about the way those ideas are spoken and shared and presented. If those ideas are spoken and shared and presented from a place of vulnerability, from a place of I think, I believe, I hope, I'm not sure, this is where I'm at right now, I'm not trying to change your mind, I'm not even sure about my own mind in this situation. This is what I'm wondering about. This is what I'm thinking about. That was a really healthy environment for sharing different ideas and allowing different ideas to percolate and change and morph and be considered. again, without that threat. Now, is that something you could do with a family member who has a different political viewpoint than you do? I don't know. But again, I think it's possible if the other person, as going back to the example that Jordan gave, if you could meet the other person in a place of, can we just be real with each other? Can we just be honest? I'm not 100% certain about my beliefs. And can we both agree to talk, to be real, to be honest, to not try to change each other's minds, but just listen to each other, to not play this game of aha, or pounce on each other the minute we see a weakness or an opening. I'm going to get that. I'm going to exploit that. That we're not trying to manipulate each other. We're not trying to exploit each other. We're really just trying to listen. And I think maybe it just comes down to that. Most of us do not talk to each other genuinely to listen to each other. What's the quote? I have this quote on a piece of paper in my bedroom on my dresser, and I'm going to paraphrase it because I can't remember exactly how it goes, but it's something like, listening to people is so close to loving them that most people can't tell the difference. I'm going to say that again. Listening to someone is so close to loving them that most people can't tell the difference. And I think, man, what a beautiful quote. If we could really learn to listen to one another, genuinely listen to one another, what a beautiful skill that would be. And if we could create an environment of safety with people that disagree with us and we disagree with, so that they felt that they could listen to us, really listen to us, what we're saying, to really consider it without their guard up, right? So we're not talking in memes. We're not talking in gotcha mentality, hopefully you know what I mean by that. You understand what I'm saying. We're not just repeating our favorite, comedian or talk show host or, news source or something, which supplies us with an endless supply of comebacks and gotchas, and to own this other person or destroy this other person, and aha, we got them. That's the mentality that's killing us. That's the mentality that keeps us in an us and them framework. And what I'm saying is, and what Jordan is saying here in this quote I'm talking about, is that we have to lose our certainty, embrace the humanity of the other person, come ourselves with a level of humility and vulnerability and a willingness to listen to the other person and be honest with the other person about the things we're unsure about, and to trust one another in those situations. And so I think this is where the rubber meets the road, really. This is where this whole pie in the sky, oh, we're all connected, we're all one, I'm connected to you, you're connected to me, I'm one with you, we're both one with Christ and God. Those are powerful ideas. But it means absolutely nothing if we are incapable of meeting each other at that level of oneness, if we're incapable of communicating with each other at this level of connection and oneness. So we have to fight for it. We have to not just realize the separation is an illusion. We need to literally create another reality, another space where that illusion dies, where that separation cannot exist. And that dies at common ground. It dies on the level of our shared humanity. And we have to begin by finding that shared humanity and beginning the conversation from there. So I think that's the key. I talked, the empathy is such an important thing. We've lost it, haven't we? Don't you sense that? Don't you feel like we're living in a world right now where empathy is just a lost art? We don't have empathy for our fellow human beings, especially if the person we see suffering is one of them. if they're the enemy in our mind on any level, our empathy for them, when we see them fail, when we see them embarrassed and humiliated, when we see them hurting, we celebrate. That is the opposite of empathy. Empathy would be, no matter if I see another human being who I am one with and connected with, who I share a connection with Christ and the source of all living things, someone who is connected to me through this Christ consciousness, just another human being. I see them hurting, I see them humiliated, I see them suffering, and my heart is connected to them. And I feel a genuine empathy for that human being. That's when you know that you're taking this divine unity thing seriously. Not easy to do, but I think that's what has to happen. And I think this is such a critical thing for us to understand. I'm going to give a weird example here, and then I'm going to wrap this up. I was reading, some of you guys know I'm a huge science fiction fan. I'm a big fan of Philip K. Dick. And I'm going to give a spoiler here for one of his lesser novels. Lesser in the sense it's not well known. So we're at like 44 novels. One of his novels is called The Zap Gun. And I avoided that novel for the longest time because most of the covers of The Zap Gun that I've seen are stupid. They just look dumb. And it just sounded like a stupid thing. The Zap Gun. What a stupid title, right? I just had no interest in reading it. Well, I did read it about a year ago. And again, spoiler. So these aliens surround the planet Earth and they're basically going to destroy us. They give us an ultimatum and they're going to destroy us. And the solution, because we realize we cannot fight them, right? Our weapons are toys compared to them, right? And that's the irony. The way we humanity sort of overcomes this, massive alien presence and threat to our survival is through a toy. So one of the main characters, he makes toys, and there's a toy that's based on an alien life form we found. It's almost like a little insect, and this insect has the ability to sort of psychically connect with us, so that we feel what this little insect is feeling. And so they made a game where they took this little insect and they put it in like a little ball. These little toys where you've got like a maze, right? And you can see like a little silver ball, and you're moving it around the maze until you're trying to get the ball through the maze into the other side so it goes through the hole. So it's a game like that, only it's this bug inside. And when you're playing the game and you're trying to move the insect to kind of guide the insect through the maze, you feel the anxiety this insect feels. The more you play it, the more connected you become emotionally to what this insect is feeling. And the insect is feeling stress. It feels trapped. It needs to get out of this maze. And I think maybe there's a food thing on the other side. It's hungry. It wants to eat. And so the more you're playing it, the more you feel like you are in the maze with this creature. And so you're even more motivated, right, to quickly as possible help this creature escape the maze, get to the food, and find this relief from this anxiety and fear. So that's how the game works. So what they decide to do is we send a bunch of these games with these little creatures in them. We send them up to the aliens. And it works because the aliens start playing the game. They start feeling the emotional connection to this animal in the maze, this creature in the maze. And it gives them empathy for us on our planet. We're just like that creature trapped in the ball. We are these little creatures trapped on our planet, and we're at their mercy. And it gives empathy to the aliens to say, oh, these poor humans, they're terrified of us, right? We should help them. We shouldn't destroy them. We shouldn't see them as an enemy. And so empathy in the story, empathy is the weapon that brings peace. And it's such a beautiful solution and metaphor. It's brilliant. I love it. It's one of the things I love about Philip K. Dick. Such an unexpected solution to the problem. Because, in any other situation, our solution to the problem would be, let's nuke them. Right? So let's launch every missile we have, right? Every movie you've ever seen, that's the solution to that problem. More violence. The solution to violence is more violence. The solution to aggression is more aggression. But we know that that's not true. We know that that's not true. And this is the genius of Jesus saying, love your enemy. That's what works. That's what changes the polarity. That's what creates a difference, right? As human beings, we have eons of human history where it's an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. You disrespect me, I disrespect you. You strike me in the face, I strike you in the face. You hurt one of my family members, I hurt 2 or 3 of your family members. You kill somebody in my family, I wipe out your entire family, right? It just keeps escalating until ultimately we have genocide. We're just wiping out every single person from that entire people group and tribe. And that's been our pattern. Jesus tells us, shows us how to break the pattern. Don't respond that way. Meet them on common ground. Love them instead. They're expecting you to meet anger with anger, violence with violence, hatred with hatred. And instead, meet them with love, meet them with compassion. Change the story, change the polarity. This is the power of empathy. This is the power of connection and oneness. This is the power of common ground. We have to be able to stop and acknowledge that this is the only thing that makes any sense. This is the only solution that will ever work. Because again, an eye for an eye leaves the whole world blind. But loving your neighbor as yourself, loving your enemy, seeing the humanity of the other person, seeing yourself in your enemy. You cannot kill them if you look and you see yourself. If you look and you see the Christ that you love, you can't kill them, hurt them, do any violence to them, because you see something of them. You see something of yourself in them, something of the divine in them. And what we're talking about here in this podcast episode is about the real struggle to look for that humanity, to find that common ground, to cultivate that empathy, and to begin our conversations with the other person, acknowledging that they are not an other person. They are a person like you, just like you, that they have Christ in them, the same Christ that's in you, the divine spark that is in every human being, every living thing. This is the only way we break out of it. Empathy, it's our only hope. Connection, it's our only hope. And that's why I thought it was just so important to do an episode about this topic today. I hope this was helpful. I hope this gets you thinking about, conversations that you're having, people you're finding it difficult to love and be in connection relationship with. And hopefully a real simple, practical, well, no, I shouldn't say simple. It's not simple, is it? But a practical way to at least begin having those conversations. And, it's what I'm going to be trying to do. And I'd love to hear from you. If you have any thoughts about this episode, anything I've shared here, send me a comment. Please like and review and share. I'd appreciate that. I have to mention every time that there is a book. If you love Second Cup with Keith, the podcast, you will really love the book. There's a book called Second Cup with Keith. That's on Amazon. It's on Kindle. The audiobook is in process right now, but check that out on Amazon. I have a brand new book coming out April the 23rd. That is The Quantum Sayings of Jesus, Decoding the Lost Gospel of Thomas, also on Amazon. And I'd love for you to check that out. And it's all about what we're talking about. It's all about this connection, divine connection and oneness that we have with our fellow human beings and with Christ. So thank you for listening. And I guess we'll see you again next time on the next episode of Second Cup with Keith. Have a great one. We'll talk soon. Bye-bye.